All right, ready to dive into some seriously mind-bending stuff today. We're going deep on teleological theories of mental content,
Ooh, yeah.
and I have a feeling this is going to be one of those deep dives that just leaves you kind of staring out the window afterwards, just pondering the universe,
Yeah.
the nature of reality itself.
You might be right about that.
Exactly. So imagine you're having a thought like, that cloud looks like a giant bunny. Pretty simple thought, right?
Right.
But here's where the philosophy kicks in.
Yeah.
How do we know that thought is actually about a bunny-shaped cloud and not, say, like the concept of cloudiness or even something totally unrelated?
You've stumbled upon the classic problem of intentionality, the aboutness of thoughts.
Yeah.
It seems so basic, right? It's
Right.
so intuitive, but then when you start digging into it,
Yeah.
it becomes incredibly complex.
And that's where these teleological theories come in to try to explain this aboutness
Yeah.
by connecting it to, like, our evolutionary history.
Exactly.
So we're not just talking about brains in jars here,
No.
but brains that have evolved to interact with an environment,
Yeah.
to solve particular problems, to survive.
Right. If our ancestors couldn't accurately represent predators or food sources,
Yeah, right.
their chances of survival would be pretty slim.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So the ability to form thoughts that accurately guide action, that would have been a huge evolutionary advantage.
Right. So the very fact that we can think lion behind that bush and then, run away
Yes.
means that that kind of thought-producing ability was advantageous for our ancestors.
That's the basic idea.
Okay, so I'm starting to see the connection here, but how do we actually unpack this? Like, how do we get specific about this connection between evolution and the meaning of our thoughts?
Right.
We're philosophers here, so I want to get into the nitty-gritty.
Well, you've provided us with a great resource,
Sure.
an entry from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on, you guessed it, teleological theories of mental content. It lays out the landscape beautifully, exploring different approaches to this mind-boggling problem.
Okay, so let's start with just a really basic concept.
Right.
Function. Like, we use this word all the time, but what does it really mean in this context of evolution and thought?
Oh, that's a crucial question. In biology, we say the function of a heart is to pump blood.
Okay.
But why do we say that? It's not just because it happens to pump blood, but because that's what it was selected for over generations, hearts that pumped blood. Well,
Yeah.
they contributed to survival and reproduction, so that trait got passed down.
So it's not just about what something does,
Right.
but like what it's supposed to do based on its role in an organism's survival and reproductive success.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, teleological theories suggest our mental processes have functions too.
Okay.
The parts of our brains responsible for producing thoughts, likely selected for because those thoughts, helped our ancestors in some way.
So the very fact that we can think there's a lion behind that bush and act accordingly, perhaps by running very, very fast, means that kind of thought-producing ability was advantageous for our ancestors.
That's the basic idea. Of course, it gets more complex when we consider misrepresentation and error.
Okay.
Our thoughts aren't always accurate, right?
Okay.
We can make mistakes, misinterpret things, even have completely false beliefs.
Right. I mean, sometimes that rustling in the bushes is just the wind,
Yeah.
not a lion.
Yeah.
So how can these teleological theories account for this possibility of being wrong
Yeah.
if our minds were supposedly shaped by evolution for accurate representation?
That's the million-dollar question. It's one of the central challenges for any teleological theory of mental content.
Yeah.
How do we reconcile the fact that our minds can be so brilliant and yet so fallible at the same time?
It's a good reminder that evolution isn't about creating perfect beings, but beings that are good enough to survive and reproduce. So maybe our minds are just good enough at representing the world
To get by, but not perfect.
That's a great point.
Okay.
And this leads us to a fascinating exploration of different thinkers
Okay.
who've tackled this problem of misrepresentation and error, each with a unique perspective.
So we're not talking about one monolithic teleological theory,
Right.
but like a whole family of related ideas,
Yes.
all trying to explain how meaning arises from our evolutionary past. It's like we've got this philosophical buffet,
Oh, I like that.
and we're going to sample different flavors of teleosemantics.
I love that analogy. And each flavor brings something unique to the table.
Okay, great.
Let's start with Fred Dretske. He's known for his information theoretic approach, focusing on the idea that mental representations carry information,
Okay.
much like coded messages.
So my thought, there's a lion. carries the information lion.
Yes.
But how does that information get linked to actual lions in the world? How does that aboutness emerge? Dretske suggests that the content of a mental representation, what it's about, is tied to what it was supposed to indicate, based on its function.
Okay.
And to illustrate this, he uses a rather intriguing example from the natural world.
Oh, okay.
Anaerobic bacteria with built-in compasses.
Wait, bacteria with compasses. That sounds like science fiction.
It's totally real.
Wow.
These amazing little creatures use tiny magnets called magnetosomes to navigate towards oxygen-free zones, which are their ideal environments.
That's incredible.
Right.
But how does this relate to our thoughts?
Well, Dretske asks,
Right.
what's the function of these magnetosomes? Is it to indicate the oxygen-free zone itself, or simply the magnetic north that leads them there?
Huh.
What happens if we introduce a bar magnet
Yeah.
and trick them into going somewhere with too much oxygen?
Right.
Have they misrepresented the environment?
Whoa. So even in nature, we see these examples that blur the lines between accurate and inaccurate representation.
Right.
It makes you wonder, does nature itself make mistakes?
It's a fascinating question, and it highlights a key challenge for teleological theories.
Okay.
How do we determine the specific function that determines content?
Right. So in the lion example,
Yep.
is the content of my thought lion? Because that's the actual object out there. Or is it something like potential danger or run away?
Yeah,
Because those are the ultimate behavioral outputs triggered by the thought.
precisely. Dretske argues that to have truly determinate content, a creature needs to be capable of learning new ways to represent the same thing.
Okay.
This way, the content isn't just tied to one specific sensory input or behavioral response.
So a creature that can recognize a lion by its roar,
Yes.
by its scent and its tracks, might have a more determinate concept of lion
Yeah.
than one that only reacts to its visual appearance. So the concept becomes more abstract, more flexible.
Exactly.
Okay.
But even with this learning requirement, Dretske's theory faces some challenges. For example, how do we deal with representations of things that can't pause our thoughts directly, like abstract concepts or things in the future? How can our evolutionary history explain our ability to think about things that have never existed or might never exist?
Those are great questions.
Yep.
So Dretske gives us a lot to think about, but there's also other thinkers out there who have different takes on this whole teleosemantics thing.
Yes.
Ruth Millikan.
Yes,
Her approach seems to focus on a different aspect of representation.
it does.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Millikan's theory, often called biosemantics, shifts the emphasis from the producer of a representation
Okay.
to the consumer.
Okay.
She argues that all representations are like messages passed between parts of the mind, and their meaning depends on how the receiving part of the mind is supposed to use that information.
So it's not just about what information a representation carries,
Right.
but about how that information is interpreted
Yeah.
and acted upon.
Exactly. Imagine a squirrel burying a nut for the winter. Does the squirrel think nut? Or is it something more like future food source
Right.
based on how its memory and foraging systems are supposed to use that information?
Yeah, so it's like the meaning of the message depends on who's reading it
Yes.
and what they're supposed to do with it.
Got it. Got it. And Millikan's theory raises some fascinating questions about the relationship between representation, action, and survival.
Okay.
But, like Dretske's theory,
Yeah.
it also faces certain challenges. For example, how do we avoid the problem of overspecificity?
What do you mean by overspecificity?
Well, let's go back to the squirrel burying the nut.
Oh,
If the nut has to be a specific type of nut,
Right.
buried in a specific location,
okay.
and retrieved at a specific time to truly fulfill its function as a future food source,
Yeah.
does that mean the squirrel is thinking about all those specific details every time it buries a nut? That seems a bit much, even for a clever squirrel.
It's like saying the squirrel has this detailed map and calendar in its head,
Check.
planning out its entire winter food supply.
This is one of the puzzles Millikan's theory grapples with.
Yeah.
How do we determine the appropriate level of detail for a mental representation? How do we balance the role of the producer, what information is available, with the role of the consumer, how that information is used?
It's like we're trying to find the right zoom level on a map.
Perfect analogy. And speaking of different perspectives,
Yeah.
we can't forget David Papineau and his desires first theory.
Okay.
He flips the script a bit,
Okay.
suggesting that the content of our desires determines the content of our beliefs,
Okay.
rather than the other way around.
So my desire for a perfectly ripe avocado shapes what I believe about where I might find one.
Well, not quite that simple.
Okay.
Papineau argues that a desire's content is the effect it's supposed to produce.
Okay.
So, satisfying hunger or getting nutrients, in the case of food,
Okay.
then the content of our beliefs is determined by how they help us fulfill those desires.
So if I desire a ripe avocado, my belief that the farmer's market has the best avocados
Yes.
is going to help me satisfy that desire by guiding my actions.
Right.
Okay, so it's like my desires set the goals,
Yes.
and my beliefs provide the roadmap.
That's a great way to put it. Of course, Papineau's theory also faces pushback.
Okay.
Critics point out that our desires aren't always so neatly tied to survival or evolutionary advantage.
Yeah, like my desire to win the lottery probably won't directly impact my survival.
Right.
And my desire to eat an entire pint of ice cream might actually be detrimental in the long run.
Exactly. These are just some of the challenges Papineau's theory grapples with.
So it seems like we've got this really interesting philosophical puzzle on our hands, right?
We do.
We've explored 3 different approaches to teleosemantics.
Right.
Each one kind of highlights a different facet of this complex problem.
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
And to add another layer of complexity, we have Karen Neander
Oh, okay.
and her causal informational theory, which tries to bridge the gap between the informational and functional perspectives.
Okay, I'm ready for another layer. Bring on the complexity.
Neander's theory suggests that mental representations get their meaning from both the information they carry and how they are causally linked to the things they represent. It's like taking the best of both worlds, combining Dretski's focus on information with Millikan's emphasis on the consumer.
Okay.
So it's not just about what a thought signals, but also about how that signal is used by the organism to navigate its world. It's about the interplay between information and action shaped by evolution.
Gotcha. So it's not just what a thought signals, but also how it helps you survive, right?
Right. She emphasizes the idea of normal causes, the things a mental process was selected to respond to.
Okay.
Think about a bird that builds a nest.
Okay.
The bird's brain isn't just responding to the immediate stimuli of twigs and leaves, right?
Right.
It's responding to a whole cascade of evolutionary pressures that have shaped its nest-building behavior, pressures related to reproduction, protection, and survival.
So the content of the bird's thoughts, if we can call them that, isn't just twig or leaf, but something more like
Right.
nesting material or even like a safe haven for my offspring.
Exactly.
It's about the evolutionary function that those materials and behaviors serve.
Precisely. And Neander's theory offers a way to address some of the challenges we've discussed, like the problem of overspecificity.
Okay.
The bird doesn't need to have a detailed blueprint of the perfect nest in its mind.
Right.
It just needs to respond to the normal causes, those environmental cues and internal drives that have proven reliable over generations.
It's like this dance between instinct and experience,
Yeah.
where evolution provides the basic steps
Mm-hmm.
and the individual bird kind of adapts those steps to its specific environment.
Beautifully put. But even with Neander's nuanced approach, teleosemantics as a whole still faces some pretty formidable challenges.
Huh.
One of the most persistent is the problem of functional indeterminacy.
Ah, yes. Functional indeterminacy.
Yeah.
It sounds very philosophical and a bit intimidating, but I think I get the basic idea.
Okay.
It's the challenge of pinning down the specific function of a mental process, right?
Yeah.
Because there could be multiple ways to describe
Yes.
what a thought is for, especially when we're talking about the complexities of evolution.
You've got it. And if we can't isolate the one true function of a thought,
Right.
how can we confidently say what that thought is about?
Yeah. Okay.
It's like trying to define the meaning of a word with multiple overlapping definitions.
I see. So going back to our bird building a nest, is the function of its nest-building behavior to protect its eggs,
Yeah.
to create a comfortable environment for its chicks,
Right.
to attract a mate, or maybe all of the above.
Exactly. These functions are all interconnected and contribute to the bird's overall fitness.
Right.
So which one determines the content of its thoughts? Tough question.
It's a tough question. And I imagine this problem of functional indeterminacy gets even more tangled
It does.
when we consider complex causal chains, like those involved in evolution.
Absolutely. The Stanford Encyclopedia uses a great example to illustrate this. The antelope's altered hemoglobin.
Okay.
This genetic adaptation might have been selected for because it increased oxygen uptake,
Okay.
which allowed the antelope to reach higher altitudes,
Okay.
leading to better grazing.
Mm-hmm.
Improved nutrition,
Mm-hmm.
stronger immunity,
Okay.
and ultimately higher chances of survival and reproduction.
Wow, so many interconnected factors, all contributing to the antelope's success.
Right.
But where does that leave us
Right.
when we're trying to say what's the function of this altered hemoglobin?
Exactly.
Is it to increase oxygen uptake, to reach higher altitudes, to improve nutrition,
Yay.
or all of the above?
It's like trying to untangle a giant knot.
Right.
And if we can't clearly define the function,
Yeah.
how can we determine the content of any thoughts or mental representations that might be associated with it?
It's a reminder that evolution rarely works in neat linear pathways, right?
It.
It's more like this messy, branching web of interconnected adaptations,
Yes.
making it difficult to isolate specific cause and effect relationships.
Well said. Now, proponents of teleosemantics have various strategies for tackling these indeterminacy problems.
Okay.
Some, like Neander, argue that we need to focus on the normal causes of a mental process,
Yeah.
those immediate environmental cues and internal drives that have shaped its evolutionary history.
Right.
Others, like Millikan, emphasize the role of the consumer of a representation,
Right.
suggesting that the way information is used ultimately determines its content.
So it's like they're looking at the same complex web of evolution,
Yeah.
but focusing on different points of reference.
Right.
Neander's looking at the inputs, the triggers,
Right.
while Millikan is looking at the outputs, the actions and consequences.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. And this debate highlights the ongoing challenge of clarifying the relationship between function, representation, and evolution.
It's a reminder that even our most fundamental concepts, like the meaning of our thoughts, are shaped by a long and often messy evolutionary history.
Right.
And speaking of messy histories, there's another famous challenge to teleosemantics
Yes.
that directly confronts this notion of history,
Yeah.
the swamp man argument.
Ah, yes. Swamp Man, the ultimate philosophical thought experiment.
Okay, for those of us who haven't had the pleasure of meeting Swamp Man,
Okay.
set the scene. Who is this mysterious creature, and why is he causing such a stir in the philosophy of mind?
Picture this. A bolt of lightning strikes a swamp, and through some incredible cosmic coincidence, the resulting arrangement of molecules forms an exact physical replica of, say,
Wow!
same brain structure, same memories, same everything.
So, like, nature accidentally created a perfect clone?
We call this being Swamp Man.
Swamp Man, okay.
Yeah.
I'm guessing there's a catch, right?
You're right, there's a big catch.
Okay.
Swamp Man has no evolutionary history.
Oh,
He just popped into existence, fully formed, with no ancestors, no developmental process, no design plan.
okay.
He's a physical replica, but without the history that shaped your mind.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going. If teleosemantics is all about meaning arising from evolutionary function,
Yes.
what does that mean for Swamp Man, who has no evolutionary past?
Right.
Does he even have thoughts?
That's the million-dollar question. According to many teleological theories,
Okay.
Swamp Man's thoughts wouldn't have any content. They
Mhm.
wouldn't be about anything, even though they're identical to yours in every physical detail.
Wait, so he could say, there's a cat in the garden,
Yes,
but that thought wouldn't actually mean anything.
that's right.
Even if he acted like he saw a cat, maybe hissing or running away.
That's the counterintuitive implication of many teleological theories.
Wow.
Swamp Man's internal states lack the evolutionary grounding that, according to these theories, gives them meaning.
Yep.
He's like a perfectly functioning robot mimicking human behavior,
Right.
but without any genuine understanding.
Okay, so that's both fascinating and a bit unsettling.
It is.
It really highlights the role of history in shaping who we are, not just physically, but mentally as well.
Absolutely. The Swamp Man argument forces us to confront the question, is having the right physical structure enough for thought, or is something more required? Does meaning need a historical foundation?
It's like asking, is a house just a collection of bricks and wood?
Yeah.
Or is it the history, the memories, the lives lived within its walls that make it a home?
Beautiful imagery. And the debate over Swamp Man is far from settled.
Yeah.
Some philosophers argue that our intuitions about him are misleading. They say just because he looks and acts like he's thinking
Right.
doesn't mean he actually is.
Right.
After all, appearances can be deceiving.
Right. Like a really good AI might seem like it understands us,
Right.
but deep down, it's just following algorithms and crunching data.
He's-
So could Swamp Man be a similar case? Like a biological mimic without true mental content?
That's one way to think about it.
Oh,
Others argue that even if Swamp Man does have thoughts,
okay.
it doesn't undermine teleosemantics because it's a theory about the actual world,
Hmm.
not about all possible worlds. They say the mere possibility of a thinking Swamp Man doesn't disprove the idea that, in our world, meaning is grounded in evolutionary history.
So it's like saying, just because you can imagine a world where the laws of physics are different
Yes.
doesn't mean those laws aren't true in our world.
Right.
Swamp Man might be a philosophical outlier,
Right.
a fascinating exception that
Yes.
doesn't break the rule.
Exactly. But the Swamp Man argument remains a powerful thought experiment,
Right.
pushing us to examine our assumptions about the nature of thought, consciousness, and the role of history in shaping our mental lives.
It's a reminder that the philosophy of mind is full of mysteries and paradoxes.
It is.
And sometimes the most seemingly simple questions like, what are our thoughts about, can lead us down some very deep entangled rabbit holes.
Right.
Speaking of rabbit holes, there's another challenge to teleosemantics
Yes.
that questions how broadly these theories apply. Is everything that exhibits seemingly purposeful behavior
Right.
a thinking thing?
Right.
Do we end up attributing thoughts
Yeah.
to things that intuitively shouldn't have them?
You're talking about the worry that teleosemantics might be too liberal in its attribution of mental states?
Exactly. Where do we draw the line between
Yeah.
what does and doesn't count as a thinking entity? Who gets to decide?
That's the heart of the debate. Remember how Millikan's theory, biosemantics, suggests that all living things are representational systems?
Yeah.
Well, some critics find this overly broad.
Okay.
They argue that it trivializes the concept of thought if we apply it to, say, plants or bacteria.
So it's like saying my houseplant is thinking I need more water
Right.
when it wilts.
Exactly.
It's a metaphor, not a literal description of its internal state.
Precisely. Critics argue that teleosemantics, taken to its logical extreme,
Yeah.
blurs the line between simple biological responses and genuine mental representation.
Yeah.
They worry that it strips away the specialness of thought, reducing it to mere biological mechanism.
I see their point. It does seem strange to say that a sunflower thinks about the sun,
Yeah.
even though it clearly tracks its movement throughout the day.
Right.
There's a difference between responding to a stimulus and having a mental representation of that stimulus, right?
That's the key distinction.
Right.
And some proponents of teleosemantics have tried to address this concern
Okay.
by refining their theories. They argue that we need to look for more sophisticated markers of mental representation beyond just basic function.
Okay.
For example, some propose that only systems with certain complex capabilities, like sensory constancy mechanisms,
Right.
truly qualify as representational.
So a system that can perceive a constant object despite changes in lighting or perspective
Yeah.
might be a better candidate for thought
Yep.
than one that simply reacts to stimuli in a basic way.
Exactly. It's about looking for evidence of internal models of the world, not just simple stimulus response mechanisms.
Right. It's about the level of processing
Yes.
and integration involved.
But even with these refinements, the debate over liberalism persists,
Yeah.
forcing us to grapple with fundamental questions about the nature of thought and the boundaries of cognition.
It's a reminder that the more we learn about the natural world, the more those clear-cut boundaries seem to dissolve, revealing a spectrum of cognitive abilities that challenge our traditional categories.
Right.
It makes you wonder if we're even asking the right questions when we try to define thought in such a black and white way.
That's a profound point. Maybe we need to move beyond simple dichotomies and embrace a more nuanced understanding of the continuum of cognition.
It's exciting to think about all the possibilities. But before we get too carried away,
Okay.
we have one final challenge to tackle. How does teleosemantics explain our ability to think about things that don't even exist? Abstract concepts, fictional characters, hypothetical scenarios, these all seem to defy a straightforward evolutionary explanation.
You've hit upon the problem of sophisticated concepts.
Yeah.
And it's arguably one of the most significant hurdles for any naturalistic theory of mental content.
Huh?
How do we account for our ability to think about things that have no direct impact on our survival?
Yeah.
Things that don't even exist in the physical world.
It's like asking, how did evolution equip us to write poetry,
Right.
to compose symphonies, to ponder the meaning of life?
Yeah.
These activities seem so far removed from
Yeah.
the basic needs of survival and reproduction that supposedly drive evolution.
They do. And it's a challenge that has led some philosophers to reject teleosemantics altogether,
Wow.
arguing that it simply can't account for the richness and complexity of human thought.
Okay.
But proponents of teleosemantics haven't given up so easily. They argue that We shouldn't underestimate the power of evolution to
Mhm.
generate complex and unexpected outcomes.
Okay.
Remember Millikan's ideas about derived and adapted functions?
Right. She argues that even if a mental process wasn't directly selected for a specific purpose,
Yeah,
it can still acquire new functions based on how it's used.
right.
It's like a tool that was originally designed for one job,
Uh-huh.
but ends up being useful for all sorts of other things.
That's a great analogy. Think about our opposable thumbs.
Okay.
They were likely selected for their ability to grasp branches and tools, but we've adapted them for all sorts of other tasks,
Right.
from texting to playing the piano.
Right. So our ability to think about abstract concepts might be like
Yes.
playing a concerto with thumbs that were originally designed for climbing trees.
Right.
The basic building blocks are there, but we've learned to use them
Yes.
in ways that go far beyond their original purpose.
Precisely. And this applies to our mental abilities as well.
Yeah.
The capacity for language, for example, might have evolved for communication about concrete things
Yeah.
like food sources or dangers,
Mhm.
but we've adapted it to express abstract ideas, to tell stories, to build entire worlds of fiction.
So it's almost as if evolution has given us this toolbox of mental skills.
Yes.
And we've become master tinkerers,
Yeah.
constantly finding new and creative ways to use those tools.
That's a wonderful way to put it. Of course, this is just one possible explanation, and the debate over how teleosemantics can handle sophisticated concepts is ongoing.
Yeah.
But it's a reminder that evolution isn't just about brute survival.
Okay.
It's also about creativity, adaptability, and the emergence of new possibilities.
So it's inspiring to think that our capacity for abstract thought,
Yes.
for imagination,
Yeah.
for wonder,
Yeah.
might all be rooted in the same evolutionary forces
Right.
that shaped the simplest life forms. It's a testament to the boundless potential that lies within even the most humble beginnings.
Beautifully said. And this brings us to the heart of what makes teleosemantics such a fascinating and challenging area of inquiry.
Yeah.
It pushes us to consider the deep connections between our minds, our bodies, and the vast evolutionary history that brought us here.
It's a reminder that we're not just brains in vats, but embodied beings, embedded in a world that we both perceive and shape with our thoughts.
And this interplay between mind, body, and world is something that teleosemantics continues to explore,
Yeah.
shedding light on the nature of thought, meaning, and the very essence of what it means to be human.
This has been such a whirlwind tour of teleosemantics.
It has.
And I feel like we've covered so much ground.
Yeah.
We've explored the core principles, delved into the nuances of different approaches, and grappled with some of the most challenging criticisms.
have.
But before we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I want to just take a moment to kind of reflect on what we've learned
Okay.
and where this leaves us in our understanding of the mind.
I think that's a great idea.
So what are some of the key takeaways from our exploration of teleological theories of mental content? What insights have stuck with you throughout this philosophical journey?
Well, one of the most striking takeaways for me is the sheer audacity of trying to explain something as complex and enigmatic as the human mind
Yeah.
through the lens of evolution.
Right.
It's a bold move, and it's generated some truly fascinating ideas.
Definitely not an easy task.
No.
But I think that's part of what makes it so compelling.
Yeah.
Telesemantics isn't afraid to tackle big questions, to connect the seemingly disparate realms of biology and philosophy.
Exactly. And I think that's one of its greatest strengths.
Okay.
It forces us to consider the continuity between human thought and the broader tapestry of life.
Yeah.
It's not about reducing our minds to mere mechanisms, but about appreciating the profound connection between our cognitive abilities and the natural world that shaped them.
I'm also struck by the diversity of thought within the field of telesemantics. We've encountered thinkers who emphasize information,
Right.
others who focus on the consumer of representations, and still others who prioritize the role of desires and goals.
Yes.
It's a reminder that even within a shared framework, there's room for a wide range of perspectives and interpretations.
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
And this diversity of thought is a sign of a healthy and vibrant field. It means that telesemantics is constantly evolving,
Okay.
refining its ideas, and responding to new challenges.
It's like this philosophical ecosystem
I love that.
with all these different species of ideas
Yeah.
interacting and competing leading to a richer
Right.
and more nuanced understanding of the mind.
I love that analogy. And it reminds us that the quest to understand the mind is an ongoing process.
Right.
There are no easy answers,
Yeah.
no final pronouncements, just a continuous exploration of new ideas and perspectives.
And this exploration takes us beyond the confines of our own minds, connecting us to the vast web of life that surrounds us.
Mm,
It reminds us that we're not isolated thinkers,
right.
but products of a long and intricate evolutionary history.
And this history, as we've seen, has endowed us with the remarkable ability to think about not only the world around us,
Yep.
but also about ourselves,
Yeah.
about the nature of thought itself.
Yeah. So meta.
It's a gift that allows us to engage in this very conversation,
Right.
to ponder the mysteries of the mind and the universe.
It is a gift that I am incredibly grateful for.
Me too.
But I have to admit, this deep dive into teleosemantics has left me with more questions than answers.
That's the beauty of philosophy.
Yeah.
It's not about reaching definitive conclusions,
Right.
but about opening up new avenues of inquiry,
Yeah.
prompting us to question our assumptions,
Right.
and expanding our understanding of ourselves and the world.
So speaking of new avenues of inquiry, I think it's time we shifted our focus to some of the more specific challenges that teleosemantics faces. We've touched upon these challenges throughout our discussion,
You have.
but I think it's worth delving into them in more detail.
I agree. These challenges are not roadblocks, but rather invitations to deeper thinking opportunities to refine our understanding of the relationship between evolution and the mind.
So let's start with the problem of functional indeterminacy.
Okay.
That pesky issue of pinning down the specific function
Yeah.
of a mental process.
Right.
We've seen how the interconnectedness of evolution makes it difficult
It does.
to isolate specific cause and effect relationships.
It's like trying to trace a single thread through a tapestry,
Yeah, well, that's a good one.
only to find that it's interwoven with countless others,
Right.
creating a beautiful but complex pattern that resists easy unraveling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this complexity raises some fundamental questions for teleosemantics.
It does.
If a single mental process can serve multiple functions,
Yeah.
how do we determine which function determines its content?
That's a crucial question. And different proponents of teleosemantics have proposed various solutions.
Okay.
Some argue that we need to focus on the most proximate cause,
Yeah.
the most immediate trigger for a mental process.
Right.
Others emphasize the ultimate evolutionary benefit,
Right.
the adaptive function that led to the selection of that process.
So it's like we're trying to find the right level of analysis, the right zoom level on the evolutionary microscope to pinpoint the function that truly matters for content.
Precisely. And this debate highlights the ongoing challenge of
Yeah.
clarifying the relationship between function, representation, and evolution.
It's a reminder that teleosemantics is a dynamic field,
Yes.
constantly refining its ideas and grappling with new challenges.
Absolutely. And one of the most thought-provoking challenges is the infamous swamp man argument,
Oh, yeah.
which we briefly touched upon earlier.
Yeah, Swamp Man.
This thought experiment pushes us to confront the very foundations of teleosemantics, questioning whether evolutionary history is truly essential for mental content.
Okay, so remind us,
No.
who is this Swamp Man character?
Ah, yes, swamp man.
And why is he causing such a ruckus in philosophy of mind?
He's physically identical to us, but lacks any evolutionary history.
Hmm.
The thought experiment forces us to consider, does he have thoughts? Do those thoughts have content?
Yeah.
Does he truly understand the world around him?
Those are big questions.
They are deep questions,
Yeah.
and the answers are far from clear-cut.
Okay.
Many teleosanticists would argue that swamp man's thoughts are empty,
Hmm.
devoid of meaning,
Right.
because they lack the grounding and evolutionary function that gives our thoughts content.
Yeah, it's a really counterintuitive idea, though,
It is.
because he looks just like us.
Right.
He acts just like us.
He can talk, he can reason,
Yeah.
he can seemingly engage with the world in meaningful ways.
So how can we say that his thoughts are empty
Right.
just because he lacks this evolutionary past?
It's a puzzle, for sure. And some philosophers have argued that our intuitions about swamp man are misleading.
Okay.
They say that even if he behaves as if he has thoughts,
Yeah.
those behaviors might just be complex reflexes or mimicry,
Right.
devoid of genuine understanding.
So it's like saying that Swamp Man is this sophisticated automaton,
Right.
capable of impressive feats of simulation,
Yeah.
but lacking this inner world of subjective experience that characterizes true thought.
That's one way to think about it. Others have suggested that Swamp Man might indeed have thoughts,
Okay.
but that those thoughts would be fundamentally different from ours,
Okay.
shaped by his unique origin story rather than a long evolutionary history.
So it's like almost another species of thought. Right.
It is fascinating to consider the possibility of a mind
Yeah.
that operates on different principles, perhaps even accessing different realms of knowledge or experience. It opens up a whole new world of philosophical speculation.
It does. And it highlights the power of these thought experiments,
Yes.
like Swamp Man, to really push the boundaries of how we think about
They do.
the nature of mind, consciousness, and meaning.
It's a reminder that the philosophy of mind is an ongoing adventure,
Yeah.
a journey into the unknown depths of our own being.
And this journey takes us beyond the confines of our individual minds.
Yes.
Connecting us to the vast web of life, to the intricate dance of evolution,
Right.
and to the fundamental questions that have captivated thinkers for centuries.
And this brings us to the final challenge we discussed,
Okay.
the problem of sophisticated concepts.
Right, those abstract ideas.
Yeah, how can a theory grounded in survival explain our ability to think about things like democracy, justice, or even unicorns?
Yeah.
Things that have no direct bearing on our physical well-being.
Right.
Things that don't even exist in the real world.
And this is a challenge
It is.
that has led some philosophers to argue
Right.
that teleosemantics just can't account for the full range of human thought
That's right.
because it's too focused on survival.
Right. They say that our capacity for abstract reasoning, for imagination, for moral judgment must transcend our evolutionary origins.
But, as we discussed, proponents of teleosemantics have a few tricks up their sleeves.
They do.
They point to the incredible flexibility and adaptability of the human mind,
Yes.
arguing that even if our cognitive abilities evolve for specific purposes,
Yeah.
we've learned to use them in ways that go far beyond their original functions.
Think about language, for example.
Okay.
It likely evolved to facilitate communication about concrete things.
Right, like food sources or potential dangers.
Right. But we've adapted it to express abstract ideas, to tell stories, to create entire worlds of fiction.
So it's like we took the basic building blocks of language
Yeah.
and we've built these elaborate castles of thought.
It's almost as if evolution has given us a toolbox of cognitive skills.
Yeah,
And we've become master craftspeople,
right.
constantly finding new and creative ways to use those tools.
Yes.
To build ever more intricate and sophisticated structures of thought.
And this highlights the potential for emergence, right?
It does.
This idea that complex systems can exhibit properties
Right.
that aren't present in their individual components.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, so while our capacity for abstract thought might not be directly encoded in our genes, it could emerge from the complex interactions of our evolved cognitive mechanisms,
Right.
shaped by culture, language, and individual experience.
Precisely. And this idea of emergence offers a way to reconcile teleosemantics with the undeniable reality of sophisticated human thought.
It's a reminder that evolution isn't just about brute survival.
Mm.
It's also about creativity, adaptability, and the potential for something truly remarkable to arise from humble beginnings.
And that, I think, is one of the most inspiring aspects of teleosemantics.
Yeah.
It connects us to the grand sweep of evolutionary history, while acknowledging the unique and extraordinary qualities of the human mind.
It's been an incredible journey exploring this fascinating and challenging theory with you. We've covered so much ground, from the basic principles of teleosemantics to some of the most perplexing philosophical puzzles it raises.
And we've seen that teleosemantics, while far from a complete or uncontroversial theory,
Right.
offers a valuable framework for understanding the relationship between our minds, our bodies, and the evolutionary history that shaped us.
Yeah, it's a framework that encourages us to see ourselves as both products of nature
Yeah.
and creators of meaning,
Exactly.
to appreciate the continuity between human thought and the broader web of life,
Right.
and to keep exploring the mysteries of the mind with curiosity and wonder.
It's a framework that, really encourages us to see ourselves
Right.
as both products of nature and creators of meaning, to appreciate the continuity between human thought and the broader web of life,
Yeah.
and to keep kind of pushing the boundaries of our understanding.
So to kind of wrap things up here,
Yeah.
We've been talking about this huge question,
Mm.
right, of how evolution can explain the meaning of our thoughts. And we've been looking at these teleological theories,
Oh, yeah.
which try to connect mental content to function.
Yes,
But as we've seen, there are so many different ways to think about function.
there are.
How do we even pin down the specific function of a thought
Yeah.
when evolution is so messy and interconnected?
Right. It's not a simple, straightforward process.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And then we have these thought experiments like Swamp Man
Oh, yeah.
that really challenge our intuitions about what it even means to
Right.
have a mind or to understand something.
It really raises questions about the nature of thought
Right.
and whether a purely physical explanation is enough.
And then there's the question of, like, how far did these theories go?
Mm.
Can we really say that everything with a function has a mind?
Right. That's the worry about telesemantics being too liberal.
Right. Where do we draw the line between, a sunflower tracking the sun
Yeah.
and a human being writing a poem?
That's a big question.
That is a big question.
Where does that sophisticated thought come from? Right. And even if we can say, okay, well, evolution gave us these basic tools,
Yeah.
how do we explain our ability to think about things that are completely abstract,
Right.
things that don't even exist in the physical world?
Things like justice, freedom, or even, mathematical concepts
Exactly.
that seem so far removed from our everyday survival needs.
So where does this all leave us? Are we any closer to understanding how evolution could have shaped the meaning of our thoughts?
Well, I think telesemantics, despite its challenges, has given us a lot to think about.
Yeah, I agree.
It's pushed us to consider the deep connections between our minds, our bodies, and the world around us.
And it's shown us that the quest to understand the mind is an ongoing process.
Yeah, it's a journey that we're all on together.
Right. And I think that's a really exciting thing.
I do too.
So to all our listeners out there, keep pondering these big questions.
Yes,
Keep exploring the amazing world of philosophy of mind.
absolutely.
And who knows, maybe one day we'll finally crack the code of how meaning arises from the messy, beautiful process of evolution.
I hope so.
I hope so too. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.